My name is Keram Malicki-Sanchez. I am the founding director of the 5 Hours Festival of International Virtual and Augmented Reality Stories, also the VRTO Spatial Media World Conference and Expo. It's not like a speculative one day thing. It's already been happening for a long, long
Mhm.
time. It's probably not aligning with some of the expectations of people who thought they were going to cash out and make fortunes off of it, but that's a different matter altogether. And I think that what the metaverse is a sort of equalizer for folks to be able to come in from where they are as they are to embody whatever they want and to be able to communicate as a whole person and not be sort of impeded by age, weight, color, class, social spectrum. Any of those things can get erased, and you can be known for who you are or how you want to be represented. That's its true power. Yes, so VRTO was created so that people that wanted to work in this media could have a place to come together um, and do what a conference is supposed to do, which is exchange ideas from around the world, expose new processes that they were developing, put competing companies on the same stage to really like line back up again and not work in these silos of competition and covertness. It's a totally independent conference. You can't pay to have a placement on stage to shill your product. And we really do try to get as much representation across the entire spectrum of people and ideas and technologies as possible. Look, at the beginning, it was difficult to get women on the stage uh, because there weren't as many women in the industry who had been surfaced or put into a position of confidence by whatever organization as to be put forward at the beginning. And over the course of time, there's been an incredible movement to ensure that that representation is there, on all fronts, like linguistically, the color of your skin, everything that can be sort of not a non-factor. And it is much stronger now to see that you have representation across the entire spectrum. And that also is part of what informs 5 Hours, which is to have a true international festival and not one that is centered around Silicon Valley or any of the traditional media centers or clusters of power. And it teaches us infinite amounts about how we can express ourselves. Because ultimately, I don't think of these as virtual reality conferences or anything. I think of them as clusters of human thought and creativity that are using a challenging new process to express themselves more wholly. And VR happens to be the name that we gave to that process. But what we really are intending to do is to communicate ideas more wholly
Mm.
and to bypass linguistic blockades or economic blockades and say, oh, I get exactly what you mean or feel because I'm wrapped in it, you know?
Mm.
So that's the key importance of those two. And VRTO is more developer focused, and 5 Hours is output focused. So 5 Hours is a showcase for the folks' work and how it's represented to a broader audience.
Mm.
VRTO started in 2014.
14.
Yeah, but as a formal conference, its first show was in 2016,
Mm.
and 5 Hours started in the fall of 2015.
So it's like similar times?
Yes, yes. First, we
Oh.
did the festival. Basically, it grew up in the shadow of the Toronto International Film Festival. And I mean, literally, like I said, we need to do the same thing that Toronto Film Festival does, but for immersive media. And we put it in a bar that was inside the building where the Toronto Film Festival happens. So it was right around the corner from all the moviegoers.
Mm,
And 5hours.net is a website that is designed to match tiff.net, which is why we chose that domain. Right around that time, I'd been working with Indie Game Reviewer, and I went to the National Association of Broadcasters conference, as I do every year. And there was murmurings about virtual reality in the back corners, in the back corners of the halls, yeah, of the convention halls. And you had these different things surfacing. You had companies that were making 180
mm,
video capture glasses. You had people making projects like the Blue, which were rendered VR that puts you at the bottom of the ocean, um, and dome projection stuff. It was all kind of bubbling up from different places. At that time in the culture, we had 3D TV. Everybody was super excited about drone cameras and 3D TV. And I saw in the indie games sphere this sort of walking simulator stuff. And the DK1 had just come out, but it was really more of a curiosity. I mean, remember, it wasn't owned by Facebook yet, and there was no viable product. It was just like a nerd thing to do. So we didn't know if it was ever going to be fully commercially viable, but some of us believed that the future inevitably would move in that direction. Um, VR is a different thing altogether. For education, why is it so important? Is because sure, you can create immersion and you can show things at the correct scale and you can transport people to other places. But in many ways, it's also this kind of singular focus experience. Now, that might change with pass through and everything. You could be looking at your second screen and be distracted again. But there is something about fully being in the moment with VR that is quite palpable and worth considering. And it also has a social component.
mm,
So at the time of this recording with you, and this will seem quaint and antiquated very quickly, but Supernatural, which is a fitness application that is very popular and is a reason why a lot of people buy headsets. It was originally sort of sold off by Chris Milk, and then Facebook eventually acquired it, aka Meta. They just introduced multiplayer Supernatural, so you could see other point clouds of other people in there with you, and it's become a social experience. Having said that, I find that kind of stuff not as inviting because as much as I loved running a guild in World of Warcraft and socializing, I'm very much an introvert. And if I'm going to exercise, I just kind of want to be in my own thing. Now, some people say, no, it's great because other people motivate you, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, I really want the reductive nature of virtual reality to take away people and take away noise and take away distraction so I can solely focus on one activity and one exercise. And I think this is a mistake people make when they design these so-called metaverses. And even VR experiences, they think that the point is to like razzle dazzle you and overwhelm you with the possibilities of the huge VR circus of your mind. And I think it's more successful when it's the opposite. It's the fact that you can take things away out of the world and then selectively choose what should be back in that experience for you. And you can close in and have this intimate moment in the presence of whatever these objects or artifacts or icons or representations might be.
mm,
Those are the things that inform these processes. Now, more specifically, why did I catalyze Fiverr? So I went to NAB. I was going to the Toronto Film Festival. I was hearing murmurings of these things. There was this indie game uprising happening. The headsets were suddenly becoming prototypes. Um, and I wanted there to be a representation of culture in the medium. Because if you didn't have culture in the medium, then you would have this vapid, product obsessed, commercial power structure run by corporations who are just going to target you for all of the reasons I just named and sell you products. And we needed to disrupt that. We needed to have a counterpoint made by people for people about themselves on an intimate, private layer. We needed to have the punk rock. We needed to have the representation. And so I did that. And whenever people say, why do you do this? This is not commercially viable. This is difficult to scale. I'm like, well, because that's not why I do it. I'm doing it as an act of transgression, against that kind of normalizing and homogenizing and control point that happens every time corporations appropriate the subculture, the way that they did it with alternative and indie and grunge and every other thing that they name and kill and sell back to us wholesale at a premium or at a premium. That's the reason that I do it. So, when the metaverse tries to create these idyllic utopian things where everything is right there for you, and all these companies are handing you
Mm,
NFTs and cash and incentives, it's kind of the opposite of what we need in a way. Like, we want quiet, we want some sort of control over the environment. We want to have choice when we have these interactions. We want to be exposed to things that we're not necessarily familiar with or comfortable with. I don't know if that's the metaverse you want, but it's a metaverse that should exist, and it should be able to be wholly self-sustaining on nothing but those merits. Yes, 5Rs has also become, and VRTO also became 3D virtual versions. They happened during the first year that COVID became widespread in North America. We had sold a bunch of tickets for both, and those tickets are what allow us to continue. And to have to refund those things because of COVID would have been absolutely the end of those events. So I had to come up with a solution. And as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. Um, but there was no really easy solution that matched both, first of all. And at that time, Zoom, which is what we're talking on right now, was nothing but a fringe app that occasionally people used. And they had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that Zoom would become a word like Kleenex or FedEx. Um, so we went to find platforms that we could host a virtual conference on, and they were charging fortunes, and they were not really that robust. And the ones that were 3D were not necessarily Web 3D, but there was Mozilla Hubs, which was this kind of gestating project done by a bunch of former Altspace people. And they were working for the nonprofit that Mozilla was. And they had just created a white label option. So you could strip away all of the branding and you could create it for administratively how you needed it. And I was introduced to that. And I had about 6 weeks run up to figure it out. And the short version of the story is that we set it up on Amazon Web Services, and I hired a modeler who was incredible and who was very experienced with optimized 3D assets. And we built this whole world. And we had to think about, what is, I at first built like this little clubhouse in a pasture, and I brought Kent by in it. And I said, hey, look what I did. I'm gonna make a virtual conference. He's like, this is terrible. I would never want to hang out in this tiny little claustrophobic house. Like, you have all this space. So instead, we made it circular. It had no walls. It was non-orthogonal. You could go around the outside and look towards the center where people were congregating. And we built it like sort of like an atomic thing where you could just continue to build additional circular nodes. And we ran it for 30 consecutive days. At first, it was just going to be 3 days, but then my friend Galit Ariel said, you could just run it over the course of every weekend or
mm,
whatever. We didn't know what was going to happen to the world at that point. And we ended up sort of filling in the gaps and running it 30 straight days, which is a really good way to learn. But I was very comfortable because it was like World of Warcraft. So that was basically running a white label Mozilla Hubs deployment. And then when we got to 5Rs, the problem was that Hubs just didn't really run spherical video. Like, it did, but it was very chunky. You had to wait for buffering. You had these huge files. It was just not feasible. So I went back to my friends at Janus XR, which was a company originally developed at the University of Toronto. Uh, they could not commercialize it as a standalone product, so they left it as open source. And a guy named James Baikayanu converted it into a JavaScript 3JS based version for the web, which was great. I didn't understand all of that really very well at the time, but I knew that it was very good with video. And the way that you have to do streaming video online is you use something called HLS, and it's hacks up the video file into short increments, and then it plays them back one after another. And it checks, what's your data rate and whatever. So over the course of the last 5 or 6 years that we've been doing that, maybe it's 5 years, we've basically improved how we transcode 360 video that comes in. Um, at first, it was maybe maxing out at 4K because HLS was used for Netflix, and Netflix was like, yeah, maybe one day we'll need as much as 4K resolution. And browsers were capping out at 5K. Like they were just had this like artificial limit, which has now been raised. And we eventually moved off of the built-in transcoder that was on Amazon Web Services, and we sort of made our own FFmpeg transcoder, and then have like pages of little flags and parameters that we set for this transcode. And we make 8 versions for H.265 encoding, H.264 encoding, and V9 encoding for compatibility. Now, H.265 is something that most people don't even know exists, but it's a very efficient codec and encoder for streaming. It's what's used natively by the new MetaQuest headsets. So we have that version for when people watch in the Quest, and then H.264 is more compatible across other devices for the web. Excuse me. And V9 is like, for other devices that don't have those codecs installed. And at first, 5hours had these like very elaborate worlds. Like at one point, it was like a giant aquarium underwater, and there was like coral and bubbles flying and all sorts of sprites and secret rooms and clubs. And for some of us, that was really, really fun because we liked to go in, and we had at first we had fish as avatars because I didn't want you to have to be a human. And so you would swim around the environment, and then we changed it to jellyfish. So everybody was like a blobby jellyfish floating. And then Ready Player Me came about, and they created this easy to implement SDK and API. So you could just jump into these cross platform avatars. And so we were like, okay, let's let people dress up however they want. And we would have these like meetups. Industry folk, content creators, attendees could all have this embodied presence in these strange worlds, and then jump into a movie, playback immediately. They didn't need any special downloading, no buffering. It was like instant playback, and then come right back out and talk about the movie. And I was like, oh, wow, this is like amazing, because the in-person location-based experience is daunting, right? You've been there. How many headsets can we set up? How many docents can we have attending? How much wear and tear is there on the devices? When you've got a random group of people walking in and you have 60 pieces that they want to potentially watch, how smoothly can you get in and out of those experiences? So it's worth doing because not everybody owns a headset, whatever, but online clearly had its own advantages. It has disadvantages because we can't distribute all the SDKs, or sorry, the APKs to everybody. We can't release executable files to everybody. People are not going to pay attention and take the time to do it. So we have to trim off like as much of the friction as possible. It has to be really good UX. It has to be as low barrier to entry as possible. It has to be as widely usable as possible. And that's what the job is. The job is, how do you remove all friction? How do you make this understandable to both people who've never heard the jargon or understand exactly what the first thing is to do, who are not gamers, who don't know how to maneuver in many languages, without buying anything, without installing anything? That's the job. And so we're constantly iterating on simplify, 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 optimize, optimize, optimize. And the funny thing is, it's just like movie editing. If you do a really, really great job, it means that nobody noticed that you did any of it. So it's a mercilessly thankless on one hand, but that's, if you're not hearing anything, that's a good sign. It means people are probably enjoying their meal. And otherwise, it's like, I can't do this and I can't do that. And you have to constantly be managing, like, is this a weird edge case based on someone's particular system or hardware or a driver update, or lack of understanding of the technology? Or is this something that we have to address immediately? And it's not like we're working at critical mass here. It's not like we have, oh, there's 50,000 people who suddenly had this problem. We're working in hundreds of people at most. And so you have to pay close attention to, like, are we going to spend resources on this weird edge case? And if we do make that adjustment, will it break it for everybody else? So that's what we manage. And I think we've done a pretty good job of listening. When we bring in people through these tickets, basically they buy a ticket on Eventbrite and it's hooked into their API. So as soon as they buy their ticket, it's registered, and they don't have to do anything else. They just put in their email and they're in. Um, we say to folks, this is not a finished, polished experience. You are walking into a working experiment. It will break. And when you show us that it breaks, then you're helping. You're helping us make it better. And by having that kind of transparency, people, I think, appreciate that they're part of this frontier and that they are important to that frontier. And they're not just sort of, fodder to send through the money mill.
Mm.
Well, I mean, it's some of it is fairly intuitive that if everybody's stuck inside and they're desperate to feel like they can connect and have a place to move around psychologically, then of course something like the metaverse could emerge and be, the new .com boom, because everyone's like, oh my God, this is the future. This is how everything is going to be. And then it stops. And look, for the most part, we're all traumatized by the pandemic. I mean, we have not really had a collective opportunity to really sit with this and process our feelings and what happened. And there was no big parade that said, okay, you're free again, go back out into the world. And so we're in this weird sort of half life between now realizing, oh, you can work remotely from home and you can communicate with people through video chat. And this is like the norm now. But also wanting to have those embodied experiences. That's fine. That's the sort of more holistic view of it. But from a commercial perspective, people thought that they were going to become billionaires because they had everybody sort of like fish in a barrel cooped up at home and they had nowhere to go. So they were going to monetize it. And thank God that bubble popped, and that sort of opportunistic exploitation didn't happen for those reasons. Now, there's investors who are going to look at me and say, this guy's an idiot, like that's the whole point of capitalism. Sure. Um, but I don't think it would have worked anyways. It would have created this sort of like mental burnout and then hostility that would have ultimately wanted to have new cracks in the walls and explored new ways of doing it. So when you come at it from just that kind of commercial perspective, you're going to sort of eventually fail because it just doesn't have sufficient substance to keep us there all the time in all the ways. It's like the humans in the movie Wall-E. They're just sort of floating around, just sucking on milkshakes all the time, and they have no sort of internal like monologue. Um, so yes, of course, there's less people technically on our platforms now, um, but I don't think we're there yet. Like, I just really don't think we're even close to there yet. And it was interesting as of the time of this recording to see that when Meta just did their new Connect conference, instead of Zuckerberg backing away, oh, he's lost billions and billions and billions of dollars, he tripled down on it. He was like, here's a new version of the headset, and here's more glasses, and here's more tools and more. Because he and I both agree that there is this sort of spatial media future that we're inevitably going into. And I'm actually cycling back on something I laid a trap for about 20 minutes ago, which was that these commercial concerns are going to seem petty soon. It's like saying, oh, the information super highway, and you had all of these domains that sort of collapsed. It's a much more volatile thing. And we have to expand our minds about how it could potentially play out. And that's why you do festivals. That's why you do art jams. That's why you do crazy sort of hackathons, because you have to say, and what else? Like, and what else is there before we try to consolidate and productize this whole thing? What else could it potentially be? Because it might be a modality that is so alien to us right now and will seem so obvious once we land on it.
Mm. Mm,
it's like, what is the potential of this medium that we're moving towards? It's like when people said, oh, why do we need color in cinema? Why do we need audio in cinema? We can read what's on the screen. Hindsight is 2020, but it's difficult to be at the foreground, isn't it? Like at the right at the
mm,
precipice, you question yourself. People think you're crazy, but that's not the reason that you should be doing it. So that's why we don't get hit in the face like by every wave that comes crashing down, because we're just not concerned with those things. Like we had talks about psychotropics and psychedelia, and what are the things that you can draw from that apply to VR. We've talked about ritual and um, sort of sacred ritual, and we've talked about things like Draco compression for how to like take 3D assets in the web and make them more efficient. Um, Practical concerns, what does open source mean, and those things are not sexy to the commercial sphere, but they're the constituent parts. And for me, the thing that drives the interest is I came from uh, a long period of struggling with an anxiety disorder. And I'm sure that people who watch this have had maybe an anxiety attack. Maybe not all, maybe some hear about it, but they don't quite get what an anxiety disorder is. An anxiety disorder is when your connection to consensus reality starts to decouple, and you start to feel phantom pains and concerns, and you can't quite stick to it in the present. And those are a form of virtual reality, right? Like your vestibular system and your galvanic skin response and all of your balance and your breathing and everything else starts to take on a life of its own that's happening virtually in your mind. And I wanted to be able to leverage this medium to help folks understand precisely what those processes are, and perhaps and idealistically create a recursive method to work with you in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy, and helped us to better manage our mental health without taking pills and chemicals, which could do terrible things to the most precious, beautiful parts of you that make you unique and special and different and sensitive in that way, or not sensitive. So, or traumatized, or whatever it is that you're the reason for manifesting that may be. So personally and selfishly, that's what drives me underneath it. And that should help to frame why I'm interested in the weird mechanics that make it better, forcing a festival that says, let's be able to find a way to use this to tell stories, which is more lyrical, because until it becomes an expressive and accessible medium, we can't quite get to that stage of long-term support for ourselves. As climate change unfolds, I think this is a one to many medium that could be extremely powerful in both pre visualizing, pre adapting, pre rehearsing what we're going to do in the state of crisis. It might be an opportunity to remotely pilot uh, mechanical elements just through sight and head movement, whether it's moving robots to put out fires or to help people in flooded areas or to literally like lift cars and move them off the street in a flood. Like there's so many potentials for this. Um, and a lot of it happens in the industrial sector and the enterprise sector that we don't see here at the commercial layer. People who are using it for aerospace and engineering and nuclear plant, maintenance. Um, that stuff is just not trickling down to the streets yet. But have faith that all of this is unfolding, and to develop the grammar and to learn the grammar is worthwhile, and to think in dimensionally is worthwhile for those reasons. It's like when you try to learn math, you say, what's the point of learning all of this stuff, all of these equations? Because you don't have that practical application. So if you need to know what mine is that drives it, it's mental health, really,
mm,
to be able to better understand how our brains work, how notions of reality surround us and are constructed around us, how ideologies are put around us. And once you do understand those mechanisms, then you can escape them. There are big, big festivals who tried it doing VR, and they gave up
mm,
because they see that it's a lot of lift. You don't have huge throughput. For example, there's a company based in Toronto who does location-based experiences, and it's mostly projection mapped. And they need to put like 20,000 people through a month, 20 to 40,000 people. You just can't do that with VR. And what are you going to do? Go out and buy 20 MetaQuest 2s, which are going to be obsolete next year, and then you're stuck with them. And that whole upfront investment is toast, basically. So that's also extremely difficult to scale. And once they're in there, does it start quickly? Does it play properly? Is it working? Do they even know to tell you that it's working? They might be sitting there in the dark for 5 minutes and say, should something be happening? So how do you pay attention and not distract them? How do you take them out of the experience? How do you use hygiene to clean those units? And you set up, and it takes a lot of work, and you have to think about the configuration, and then nobody comes. And you think, what was this all for? But 5 Hours is designed in such a way, and again, I don't want to name other festivals, but often what festivals try to do is like they try to make this like this really important, exclusive, and urgent experience so that they can sell a lot of tickets, and they oversell. And so you have a long, long, long lineup waiting for half an hour so you can sit down, watch a 10-minute piece, and then you have to get up, and then the next person takes your spot. And that is a terrible user experience. So we deliberately have more stations than we sell tickets for because we don't want to have lineups, and we want to allow room for troubleshooting and conversation. So we sell 2 hour blocks, and people can come for that 2 hour block and watch whatever they want. And I've said this on many podcasts, but you typically find that after about an hour and a half, people kind of have had sufficient cognitive load that they're like, I'm good. I don't even want to do more VR. They come in saying, I want, how can I do it all in 2 hours? It's like, trust me, it'll be plenty. It's a lot. But that's also why we do maintain the online theater. And that's its own whole problem. Like that's troubleshooting, and that doesn't make enough money and blah, blah, blah. But honestly, it's easier to say to folks, come to do the in-person thing. I beg you, believe me, it's rare. It's hard to find. You're never going to see something like this. So please come do the in-person stuff. We will guide you through it. And then you can worry about all the 360 and passive content in the online theater so that you can offset that time and make more informed decisions. And it's become this very symbiotic thing to have the in-person and the other one so that we can represent the most diverse catalog possible. And yes, of course it's frustrating. And the most frustrating part is not doing it. The frustrating part is trying to convince people like, oh my God, this is so special. Just get down here. And it's seeming to fall on deaf ears. If you don't do it at all, then there's no possibility of it happening. And if you do it and 2 people show up, then you succeeded in a way. When you are going to talk about VR or AR or XR to others, right? Because this is presumably being watched by aspiring professionals or students or faculty or whatever. I would say to remember that what you are selling is not movie projectors. You're not selling rental space in a movie theater. You're selling an experience. You're selling more than an experience. You're selling more than a movie. You're selling a state change, a transformative moment. And what motivates somebody to come should be your biggest question. Is it really that they want to come and put a VR headset on? No. Is it that they want to buy a headset? No. Is it that they want to be at the forefront of technology? Probably not. What they want is to have a state change. They're feeling one way, whether it's I feel ignorant about the state of the world, or I feel bored, or I feel depressed, or I need something special, or I want to go out on a date and share something really unique. That's what they're coming for. And that's what you're there to deliver. So remember that there's many nuances to that, what that experience can be. And my mom used to say, if you want to get everybody's attention in a room, whisper. It's not yelling. Yelling doesn't get people's attention. You whisper and allow those nuances to happen. Like the thing is the thing. It is of itself. So allow yourself to allow those nuances and the time to let things unfold as they do, whether it is a location-based experience where you're not just rushing them through, or whether it's the content that you make, um, allow it to slow down, allow it to be quieter, allow it to be nuanced. It doesn't mean it can't be loud. It doesn't mean it can't be fast, but give yourself the latitude and remember what you're actually selling here and what you're actually working on. And it's definitely not selling VR headsets. If you go to 5rs.net, we are consistently making and improving it as an archive of the medium from the past 10 years and beyond. So you'll be able to see year by year all the pieces that were selected and the different modalities and the countries. And, so I don't know how long it'll last. I'll try to keep it up forever, but definitely go there as a resource to explore all the different kinds of things that people have done and talked about. I think it's a valuable resource.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.